It's time for Talking Michigan Transportation, a podcast devoted to the conversations with people at the forefront of the ongoing mobility revolution. In the state that put the world on wheels, here's your host, MDOT Communications Director, Jeff Cranston.
Hi, once again, welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation podcast, our first for the month of October in 2020. And today I'm going to be talking with a couple of people about a pretty serious issue, and that's excessive speeds and the role they're playing in an increase in traffic fatalities, which is really puzzling here in Michigan and in other states because traffic volumes are down an average of 20% after being down as much as 60% early in the pandemic, fewer people driving obviously, yet we have more deaths now than we did at this point in 2019. And a lot of people are scratching their heads about that. So first I'm going to be talking with First Lieutenant Michael Shaw of the Michigan State Police, and then secondly I'll be talking to Jonathan Adkins, who is the Executive Director of the Governor's Highway Safety Association based in Washington, D.C., and he'll provide a national perspective on these things. So again, first I'll be talking with First Lieutenant Michael Shaw. Lieutenant Shaw, why don't we start by letting folks know what your specific roles and responsibilities are in Metro Detroit.
So the Michigan State Police has 7 different districts. My district is the 2nd district, which covers Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties, so basically southeast Michigan. And I'm assigned the 2nd district headquarters as the public information officer. So part of my responsibility is to refer or go to ongoing incidents, talk to the media, kind of let the public know exactly what's going out there. And then, the other part of it too is I have my own social media site on Twitter to educate the public about upcoming trends that we see as far as traffic goes and other events that may affect them in the Metro Detroit area.
Well, and you do a very good job both with the media and with your Twitter feed. It's very helpful, and I appreciate it. So
thank you.
So talk a little bit about, you got the 3 most populous counties in the state. You've got by far the busiest roads in the state, and you've got the biggest media market. So you have to keep on top of a lot of things. Why do you think we're seeing this uptick in fatal crashes when traffic is down?
And that's something that, it concerns us naturally because everybody figures that we're basically under a stay-at-home order from almost March till May, so we would figure that our stats would be way down and you couldn't even count this year as far as traffic stats would go, but that unfortunately isn't the case. And some of it is going back to the very, very beginning of basic driving skills. We used to talk education-wise about, distracted driving and some of the more things that multitasking things that people are doing, but now we're seeing some of the basic stuff, excessive speed, and we're not talking 10 miles over the speed limit or 15 miles over the speed limit. We're talking 143 miles an hour that a trooper got on one of our freeways. Just people driving way too fast above their abilities to drive. And I think a lot of people don't understand that you get a crash at that speed, the chances of you having a successful outcome probably isn't there. The second thing we've seen is the lack of seatbelt use. Most of our fatalities down in this area, or at least the last few of them, have been drivers that would have survived the crash if they would have had a seatbelt on, but ended up being ejected. And then that last one there is the one that gets most people in the Metro Detroit area, and that's just following too closely. We've seen cars driving underneath the back of semi-trailers. We've seen semis running into the back of cars, people driving in rush hour traffic, not paying attention or following too closely and end up hitting the back of those cars. So we think that's in there somewhat. And also we're seeing a lot of people that maybe think they can get a little bit away with it with the pandemic going on, where people are thinking that the police might not be out there. We know we had some departments that mentioned that they weren't going to do as much traffic enforcement. So I think a lot of the public or those people that like to drive a little bit excessive are now taking it to a new level.
So that's a lot. 143 miles per hour especially is eye-popping, and I remember hearing about that. I think that you're right. The theory nationally that I've heard is that for a while there when traffic was down so much, I mean as much as 60% in Michigan immediately after the stay-at-home orders and after the outbreak. People got this idea that, it's the Wild West and the open road, and they drove like that, and then they continued to drive like that even after traffic returned. But the seatbelt thing is really puzzling, and one thing I've heard about that, and I know this is all just conjecture because that's all we can do, but because some people are so resistant to being told to wear masks, it's kind of provoked that libertarian spirit in people, like I'm just not going to do anything anymore, and you can't make me wear a seatbelt. So I don't know how else to explain that.
And that is the weird part for us, because in Michigan, we've been very fortunate. We've had a 97, 98 compliance rate. We led the nation, in seatbelt use, and usually that is not an issue for us here in Michigan as far as our drivers and seatbelt compliance. But and maybe that's part of it, is people are getting tired of being told what to do, and they're just not going to do anything. But that seatbelt will definitely save your life for many reasons. As we come up on simple things like deer hunting season, don't veer for deer. If you don't have your seatbelt on, you get in a car deer crash, the chance of you being seriously injured rises. Snow's coming, unfortunately. You wipe out in the snow, the chance of you getting injured rises, either from the airbag going off or you not being behind the wheel and being able to control that car. So you may be mad that you're being told what to do so much lately, but that seatbelt, that's something that you got to keep on all the time.
Well, it's also an issue of caring about the other people that might be in your vehicle. I know my counterparts in Utah put together a pretty controversial PSA a few years back that made the point, that a child in the back seat could be killed by you when you become a projectile because you weren't wearing a seatbelt. And I wonder if more people thought about that, if that at least would get them motivated. But like you said, up until now, we've had very good compliance in Michigan. So, it didn't seem like something we needed to keep talking about. I thought we could move on to other things. Real quickly, because you talked about cars following too closely, and those of us that paid attention in driver's ed remember what we were taught about the distances per 10 miles an hour and how you should estimate your distance. Do you think that is it distracted driving in a lot of cases? Suddenly people are creeping up on somebody, they didn't even realize it because they were looking at something else.
And I think that was part of it when we really started looking at, because we had trouble with, following too closely. In fact, looking at some of our stats, that was one of the major contributors to traffic crashes here in the district, even before the pandemic starts. But now I think that it's just amplified for that very reason. Either people aren't paying attention, or else, we've just seen, and it's kind of going back to the old Roadhouse analogy for those old enough to remember that one, just be nice. People kind of have lost that in this pandemic, where drivers aren't as courteous as they used to be, where if wanted to get over a lane, somebody usually would wave you over. Now people are just driving so close to each other because either they want to suck up that space, or they want to force you out of the way so they can continue on whatever their speed is going. And then some of it has got to be some of the distracted driving, because we see rear-end collisions in 5 mile an hour backed up traffic when traffic's in a queue trying to work their way through, and then next thing you know, the guy behind you bumps into you because their face is buried in their phone.
So do you think that there's a road rage element to this too? I mean, people are obviously on edge. I mean, people are stressed for a number of reasons, the economics of the pandemic and just the fear that creates stress that everybody lives with. Is that part of this?
I think it is. Here in Metro Detroit, since June 15th, we've had 18 different, freeway shootings, ranging from homicides to felonious assault to non-fatal shootings. 7 of those were simply because somebody was upset that somebody didn't use a turn signal, or, the famous, they felt disrespected, and they felt that that was serious enough for them to pull out a firearm and fire rounds at another person. I think some of that kind of ties into maybe a little bit of the anti-police sentiment that we're seeing out there, where people are thinking, well, I'm just going to handle this myself because the police probably aren't going to do anything about it with all the bad publicity that they're getting. So I think there's a little bit of that 2 that's kind of making this perfect storm that's out there on our roadways right now, because there's no reason that we should have this much higher of a fatal crash rate when you have that much less traffic on the road. So there's got to be some other factors that go in there besides just bad driving.
So I know you and your colleagues struggle with these things. You guys obviously have families and, children and brothers and sisters, and you have to deal with this time and again. And how do you professionally, stay engaged enough to do what you have to do, but detached enough to not let every one of these, kind of get to you?
So it's sometimes it's a little bit difficult because you get on there and I'm kind of maybe at a little bit of a disadvantage because I see the bad news all the time, monitoring the social media, being involved with the media, you kind of get inundated with it. So sometimes you think you're taking a couple of steps forward by doing these type of podcasts or going to the media and say, hey, slow down, be nice, let things go. You don't have to use a gun. Violence is bad. And then you go and the next day, there's another one. And, you kind of look at it and say, man, or you look at some of these crash scenes where you go out there. One in particular that, I was out on the scene with and kind of followed through was the construction worker that was, struck and killed on the side of the road from the Macomb County Road Commission, knowing a young man that, fought through cancer 4 or 5 times through his childhood, was trying to make a living, and senselessly, because somebody didn't move over or pay attention, lost his life on a freeway. It kind of wears on you a little bit, but I think the other part that I do is, hopefully by talking about it or really stressing this stuff out or doing this type of enforcement, that we're saving a lot of other lives as well. So you kind of look at the positive aspect of it a little bit.
Yeah, that that worker death in Macomb County is just particularly disturbing because of his personal story, and I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad you also channel some of your education efforts toward work zone safety, because those folks, as we always talk about, drive as if you work here, that try to imagine, your workplace with cars screaming by at 80 miles per hour. It's something we can't probably talk about enough. So I appreciate your efforts there. So later on, I'm going to be talking to Jonathan Adkins, who's the executive director of the Governor's Highway Safety Association, and he's got some perspective and insights about what's going on nationally that I think will complement what we talked about. But I want to thank you again for taking the time to do this, Lieutenant Shaw.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me on. And we always stress everybody to drive safely and make sure that you move over.
For the second segment today, as promised, I'm going to be talking with Jonathan Adkins, who is the executive director of the Governor's Highway Safety Administration. Jonathan, thanks for taking time to do this.
Sure, my pleasure.
So earlier, I spoke to First Lieutenant Michael Shaw of the Michigan State Police, who is the PIO for the busiest region, Metro Detroit, the 3 most populous counties in the state, and by far the heaviest freeway use from a traffic standpoint in Michigan. And, he's puzzling, too, about why it is, with traffic down so much, still an average of 20% across the state, we have more deaths at this point on Michigan roads than we did in 2019 at this time. And I see just today, as timing would have it, you guys issued a new release based on some new reports from NHTSA. So it doesn't sound as bad nationally as what we're seeing in Michigan, but you still seem like you guys are kind of scratching your heads too about what's going on, and you offer some theories. I don't know, what are your best thoughts about this phenomenon, why it would be?
Well, the national perspective is not good. Data through the first 6 months of 2020 indicate that deaths are down nationally 2%, and that sounds okay until you see that vehicle miles traveled are down about 16.5%. So we should have had a big reduction in deaths, and we are seeing some states like Michigan, Missouri, New York, and others that are actually seeing the number of deaths going up, and that's pretty incredible. We don't, it's too early to know exactly why this is happening, but we have some pretty educated guesses. We think speeding is playing a huge role in this issue. We're having reports every day from all across the country of folks getting stopped for 100 miles an hour, 120 miles an hour, just some really excessive speeding. We're also seeing, particularly in rural areas, crashes where the driver or the passenger are getting ejected from the vehicle, which suggests a lack of seatbelt use. And I think the overall issue that we're seeing is really a lack of enforcement through the pandemic to now. And on the one hand, it's understandable. Early in the pandemic, there were a lot of concerns about officer safety for sure, and public safety, and having that interaction. And the police have also had a lot of other issues going on with rioting and civil distress across the country, and so that there's been quite a bit going on. So it's not just one factor, but we're having a group of things coming together, and it's pretty concerning.
I think that, anecdotally, I definitely see what you're talking about. I'm not on the road that much right now, or as much as I used to be, but when I am, I definitely see higher speeds on the freeway. I'm curious. Lieutenant Shaw and I talked about this a little bit. The seatbelt thing seems really puzzling. I mean, we had achieved pretty high compliance in Michigan, like in the high 90% range, and now they're seeing what you're talking about, seeing in some other states, and that's not just speeding, but people not using their seatbelts all of a sudden. I can't figure that out. My only theory on that is that it's got to do with the whole mask debate, and people are ticked off about being told what to do, and it's kind of kicked in this like libertarian spirit, like I'm just not going to do anything you tell me to do. I don't have a better theory.
I think it's a pretty good theory, frankly, and it's a reminder that a lot of us do the safe thing because we know it's the safe thing, but there are a lot of us that only do the safe thing because we fear consequence. We fear getting a ticket. We fear getting in trouble. We fear getting a fine. And if folks don't think there's going to be a consequence and they can get away with it, they may not be wearing their seatbelts. They may say, you know what, the heck with it. You're not going to tell me what to do, and you can't do anything about it because you're not going to be able to stop me. So that's a big concern. The other thing that we don't know a lot about at this point, but we think that alcohol and drug use is probably playing some sort of a role. We know that in June, for example, the alcohol sales hit a record nationally. So you've got a period of time where people are really stressed. A lot of people have lost their jobs. There's a lot of loss and uncertainty still during the pandemic, and particularly in the early stages. And so we are seeing, at the same time, a lot more alcohol use. Doesn't mean that people are necessarily getting behind the wheel and driving, but when you start to see a lot of different factors all sort of heading in the same direction, it makes you wonder.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that that stress plays a huge role. That's also why road rage incidents are up. Though, yeah, it's probably a whole bunch of things. I do notice that one theory from an academic in Michigan who studies traffic safety was that there might even be more incidences of suicide or homicide by vehicle, again because of that stress and because of people just feeling under a lot of pressure.
Well, at a minimum, distraction. I think we're all clearly distracted, thinking about the pandemic, thinking about the different stresses we may be under, and thinking about sort of a whole host of different challenges that we have now that we didn't have before the pandemic. So, we see all these different factors that are at play here.
Well, what do you think this does to hardcore adherence to the 85th percentile? If we know that people left to their own devices will not self-regulate, and that belief that traffic will flow at a certain rate that is deemed safe by most drivers, this is challenging that theory, isn't it?
Well, a lot of safety advocates don't think much of the 85th percentile in the first place, and so this is probably a good opportunity to really look more broadly at the issue of speed, how we treat it as a culture. We all speed. We're all guilty of this. This is different than alcohol use or even driver distraction. Most of us certainly know that drinking behind the wheel is bad. Most of us know that cell phone use behind the wheel is bad, even if we do it. But most of the public really is comfortable with speeding. So we need to have a much broader conversation about speeding, and certainly the 85th percentile is part of that.
Yeah, I think one of my fervent hopes is that when we get to an age of truly automated and connected vehicles, that a lot of those things, are regulated by the technology.
Well, technology can play a big role. The Governor's Highway Safety Association is a big fan of automated enforcement. Cameras don't see race, cameras don't see gender, and they also don't put officers in dangerous situations. And so technology creates a lot of problems in traffic safety, thinking about driver distraction and some other things. But technology can help get us out of some of these challenges, too.
And so right away somebody's going to scream, Big Brother. How do you respond to them?
Well, driving is a privilege. It's not a right. We have a responsibility to look out for ourselves and our families and other people on the road. And it's a little bit, a reminder that there are cameras everywhere. Every time we go pretty much anywhere. Every time we get money out of the bank. Every time we go, back when we used to go to baseball games, we're always on camera. The cameras that are traffic lights, they only take your picture if you commit a violation. So I don't really buy the Big Brother argument.
Yeah, when people bring that up in terms of vehicle miles traveled and what we could do to figure out where vehicles are going, and people cite privacy concerns, and I think, my goodness, most of us carry at least one phone, if not two, and other devices. So we're already being tracked.
Yeah, privacy is kind of out the door in a lot of cases, but I don't think traffic cameras are the real issue. I think that it's an excuse sometimes for folks wanting to go fast and run intersections and behave aggressively and frankly selfishly.
So what do you think? One thing we wrestle with a lot here in the Office of Highway Safety Planning in Michigan, has their own messaging, and they're housed within the Michigan State Police. That's the way it works here. But as we talk to our counterparts there and the folks at the DOT here wrestle with is what message resonates. At a Transcom event a few years back, I did a video that my daughter actually put together when she was a senior in high school, asking her friends, what it means to them when they see a billboard or a DMS or something that says, don't text and drive. And, to a one, they basically said that doesn't really tell them anything. It's like putting a sign on a bank that says no robbers allowed, So what does alter behavior? What do you think, can actually break through and make people think twice, whether it's slowing down in a work zone or not using their phone, or at least not texting while they're driving? I mean, any of these things.
Well, it's evolving a little bit. Before the pandemic, I would have said a strong enforcement message, to remind people that if they break the law, they're going to get a ticket. We know that works. Click your ticket has been effective. But the way we think about law enforcement in this country is certainly changing. And so there's some indications, and there have been some studies as well that indicate that a softer message can be more effective. For adults, a message of slow down so you get home safely to see your kids tonight can be effective, and we're seeing some signs of that. For young drivers, they don't fear death, but they fear disfigurement. And so we've had some studies and some evidence that show that that fear of you may be in a traffic crash and be hurt, you may not be beautiful anymore, that can resonate. But just a simple don't do it message isn't going to have much impact.
So in their adolescent mind, there really is a fate worse than death.
Yes. Not being beautiful, being disfigured in some way. We've seen that in some studies, but also in presentations with students against destructive decisions and other youth groups. There's not a fear of dying, but there is that fear of disfigurement. That's
interesting, and when you mention drive like you want to see your kids tonight, we used a tagline for a while that just said drive like you want to make it home tonight. So I guess that all dovetails with what you're talking about in terms of softer messaging, and I would think the same would be true of a message that says, drive like you work here when it comes to, road construction zones too.
Yeah, and there are conversations across the country that as work zone fatalities continue, there maybe have to be some hard decisions. One thing we've learned from COVID is that sometimes you have to shut things down, as hard as that is. And states may need to consider, particularly in big work zone and big projects, they may have to shut the road down to keep people safe. That seems extreme on one hand, but on the other hand, as we continue to see these fatalities, we may not have a choice.
Yeah, I know it's true in Michigan, and I'm sure it's true at every DOT and really every local agency doing road projects, that they're trying to balance, that need for ongoing mobility with the need for safety in the work zone. I wonder if we need to rethink that balance, and sometimes there's just not going to be an opportunity to be driving, alongside people working. It's just not practical.
It's a difficult discussion, and I'm frankly glad that I'm not in the DOT. I'll let smarter people like yourself figure that one out.
Yeah. Well, this has been really, really informative, Jonathan. I appreciate it, and I appreciate that you guys are keeping tracks of these stats and helping us, figure out from state to state what might be working. And, everything is derivative, and we're all about borrowing ideas and figuring out who's doing something better. So you guys, looking at this.
Michigan does a lot of good things in traffic safety, and we like to share your successes so they can be duplicated in other states. So keep the messaging coming, please.
Okay, thanks again for listening to this week's edition of Talking Michigan Transportation, and I want to give a special thanks to Corey Peedy, who does the sound engineering for the podcast, and to Sarah Martin of MDOT, who does the show's intro and closing.
That's a wrap for this edition of Talking Michigan Transportation. Check out show notes and more by subscribing on Apple Podcasts.